They're both on now. And they have fresh batteries in them, so they won't die.
Good enough. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
of
you.
course.
Cardinal, you don't need a PowerPoint, do you?
Your name just came up. He just mentioned you. Yeah.
Yes, Michael Sean, turn around and be quiet. Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to our Bergoglio lecture. I want to start and make sure that everyone please turn off their cell phone, including me. Good. So, thank you for being here, and welcome to Sacred Heart University's Bergoglio lecture, which is sponsored by the Center for Catholic Studies. The Bergoglio lectures speak to the heart of Sacred Heart University's mission, which is rooted in the Catholic intellectual tradition and is inspired by Vatican II. The Bergoglio lectures bring to campus renowned thinkers, speakers, who tell us about the Catholic intellectual and social traditions as represented by Pope Francis's Vatican II vision and his work in the world today. This year, the Bergoglio lectures celebrate the 60th anniversaries of both Vatican II and Sacred Heart University. And for the students in the room, I bet you didn't know that Sacred Heart was celebrating its 60th birthday. Today, we are really so honored to have as our guest speaker His Eminence Wilton Cardinal Gregory, who serves as Archbishop for the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. Cardinal Gregory attended St. Carthage Elementary School, and he knew while he was at St. Carthage, even before he became a Catholic, that he was going to be a priest to serve God. He was ordained a priest in the Archdiocese of Chicago in 1973. He then earned a doctorate in sacred liturgy from the Pontifical Liturgical Institute in Rome. He was ordained the auxiliary bishop of Chicago in 1983, and in 1984 he was installed as the bishop of the Diocese of Bellevue, Illinois. In 2004, Pope St. John Paul II appointed then Bishop Gregory as Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Atlanta, and in 2019, Pope Francis appointed him as Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., and in 2020, Pope Francis elevated him to the College of Cardinals, and in 2023, Pope Francis appointed him as a member of the Synod of Bishops on Synodality. Cardinal Gregory serves as a member of the Vatican Dicastery for the Laity, Family, and Life. He is the Catholic co-chair of the National Council of Synagogues in Consultation for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. He serves as Chancellor of the Catholic University of America. And while he served in a leadership position for the USSCB, the child abuse crisis emerged and escalated, and under his leadership, the bishops implemented the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People. His Eminence has written on many church issues, including the death penalty, social justice, physician-assisted suicide. He's been awarded 9 honorary degrees, and he was inducted as illustrious preacher into the Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Preachers at Morehouse College, and he was honored with the prestigious Cardinal Bernardine Award at the National Pastoral Life Center in Washington, D.C. The Cardinal has spoken out on many issues, and I just want to cite 2. On the topic of guns, he stated, quote, "Rather than make guns more available, we need leaders in government and society who will speak against violence and teach ways of reconciliation and peace, and who will make justice, not vengeance, our goal." And a second example, and when asked by a transgender person if there was a place for them in the Catholic Church, the Cardinal responded, "You belong to the heart of the Church, and nothing you may do or may say will ever rip you from the heart of the Church." Today, it is with much gratitude and great honor that we welcome His Eminence, Cardinal Gregory, to speak to the heart of Sacred Heart on Gaudium et Spes and its legacy in the writing of Pope Francis. Join me in welcoming His Eminence.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for those kind words of introduction. My mother wrote those. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you as part of your Bergoglio lecture series. I want to thank Dr. Michelle Loris, Director of the Center for Catholic Studies, for her kind invitation, and Dr. John Patillo, President of Sacred Heart University, for so graciously hosting me. In a special way, I thank you students who are here to participate in this lecture. I look forward to your questions later on, and I do invite those questions. Once then Archbishop Piolagi, who was then the apostolic delegate to the United States, he was visiting the North American College, which was one of the things that he did regularly on one of his Roman trips, and he mentioned to the students that he would be available for questions. Well, they were, a little shy, and he said, no. There are no inappropriate questions. There are just inappropriate answers. So I hope not to give any inappropriate answers. Being here today, students, you are engaging in the intellectual life of our church. You are learning how to participate in civil dialogue as you are enriching our faith. Our young people are not only the future leaders in our church, but you are also leaders in this present moment. And I am very grateful that you are here. The title of my lecture is The Enduring Legacy of Gaudium et Spes on the Writings of Pope Francis. Pope Francis has a distinct vision of how the church should engage the modern world. And I will explore two areas that reveal that vision. The Holy Father's 2020 encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, and the current Synod on synodality. In particular, I will examine how the groundbreaking document of the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, helped to shape Pope Francis's vision for our modern world. And by sheer coincidence, today is the 11th anniversary of the election of Jorge Bergoglio as Pope Francis. Let's go back 60 years. As the Second Vatican Council convened from 1962 to 1965, it marked a pivotal moment in the history of the Catholic Church. Against the backdrop of significant cultural, social, and political changes, the Council sought to address contemporary issues and the Church's mission in the world. World War II had ended approximately 20 years before the start of the Council. Europe was rebuilding after that war. The world was coming to terms with the atrocities of the Holocaust. The Cold War was creating geopolitical tensions around the world. Massive migration was occurring around the world and also in our country. Also here in the United States, we had elected our first Catholic president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, only to see him assassinated 2 years later on November 22nd, 1963. The world was indeed changing when St. John the 23rd called for the Second Vatican Council. Against this backdrop, One of the Council's most significant documents, Gaudium et Spes, or the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, was promulgated in December 1965. It addressed the Church's relationship with the contemporary world and emphasized the Church's mission to engage with and serve humanity. If you have not yet read Gaudium et Spes, or if it has been some time since you did so, I encourage you to read it. It has one of the most poetic and moving introductory paragraphs of any church document. It begins by saying, and I quote, "The joys and the hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the people of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted, these are the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. Indeed, nothing genuinely human fails to raise an echo in their hearts." It is now 60 years later. How true does that opening paragraph ring today? Is it not true that people everywhere in our world have joys and hopes, griefs and anxieties that they wish the Church truly to understand? Gaudium et Spes envisioned a more outward-looking and engaged church, responsive to the signs of the time, and committed to the well-being of the human family, and committed to the it called upon church members, every single one of us, the clergy, religious, and laity, to influence all societies and cultures by doing several important tasks together, namely, to promote human rights and the dignity of every person, to work for social justice, to act in solidarity with all people, and to advocate for the common good, especially for those who are poor and needy. Additionally, the document affirmed the Church's mission of evangelization and the proclamation of the gospel to all nations. Gaudium et Spes taught with clarity how we as members of the Church are to engage with the world. It provides us the clear instruction to foster civil discussion, no matter how challenging in political or contentious times. It speaks of the need for collaboration and to do so with people of all faiths and cultures. The Church, Gaudium states, recognizes the inherent value of each individual and partners with all people of goodwill to collaborate on issues of common concern. Having heard some of the key features of Gaudium et Spes, let us look at the impact of Gaudium et Spes on one particular document written by the Holy Father, his encyclical Fratelli Tutti. Fratelli Tutti is also known as On Fraternity and Social Friendship, and it was released on October 2020, during the first year of the COVID pandemic. What a time that was. I would like to point out some key themes in Gaudium et Spes and then discuss how Fratelli Tutti reflects those similar themes. Gaudium et Spes emphasized the Church's engagement with the modern world, urging Catholics to actively participate in the social, cultural, and political realities of their time. Similarly, in Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis consistently calls for a church that is attentive to the signs of the time, one that is actively involved in addressing current challenges and open to dialogue with people of all backgrounds. Gaudium et Spes underscored the dignity of human beings who have an inestimable value. Throughout Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis reaffirms the dignity of every person. He asserts that every individual, regardless of their background, status, or circumstance, possesses inherent worth and is deserving of respect. This recognition of human dignity serves as the very foundation for Pope Francis's call to fraternity and social friendship in Fratelli Tutti. Gaudium et Spes advanced the idea of social justice, beginning with a preferential option for the poor and the marginalized. In Fratelli Tutti, the Holy Father denounces the socio-economic disparities that perpetuate inequality and exclusion, urging individuals and societies to prioritize social justice and the needs of the most vulnerable. The Holy Father highlights the importance of addressing the root causes of poverty and injustice, while advocating for the structural change and standing in solidarity with those who are marginalized and oppressed. Gaudium et Spes emphasized the importance of dialogue and encounter as essential for building understanding, reconciliation, and peace in society and among nations. Similarly, Fratelli Tutti underscores the need for dialogue and friendship in society, calling for a culture of encounter that transcends barriers of division and exclusion. Pope Francis encourages individuals to listen to one another's stories, acknowledge their shared humanity, and work together towards common goods. These actions are antidotes to the social fragmentation and polarization so prevalent in our world today. Gaudium et Spes reaffirmed the Church's mandate to evangelize, to proclaim the gospel to all nations. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis shares this missionary zeal, calling for a church that is outward focused, reaching out in humble service to the peripheries in the world, of sharing the good news. One final aspect of Gaudium et Spes that I would like to emphasize: Gaudium et Spes called for a greater participation of the laity in the life and the mission of the Church. While not mentioned explicitly in Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis has embraced Gaudium et Spes' call for participation, as evidenced in the process that governs the current Synod on synodality, which gathers clergy and laity together. Pope Francis advocates for a more participatory and inclusive church, where all members contribute their gifts and perspectives to the discernment of God's will. Overall, the enduring legacy of Gaudium et Spes on the writings of Pope Francis is reflected in his commitment to a church that is involved with the world, compassionate toward the marginalized, open to civil dialogue and encounter, and characterized by synodality and missionary zeal. So far, I have touched only lightly upon synodality. This concept holds much significance for our Holy Father, so I want to briefly address how synodality is a way that the Church is living out the reception of Vatican II in our world. I was honored to serve as a delegate appointed by Pope Francis to participate in the Rome Synod, while also walking with our faithful in our Archdiocese of Washington parishes. Synodality, at its core, is simply a way of being and acting as the Church. Rooted in the ancient Greek word synodos, meaning journeying together, synodality embodies a model of governance and decision-making that involves active participation, dialogue, and collaboration among the people of God, guided by the Holy Spirit and always in communion with the Church's pastors. At its heart, synodality recognizes that all members of the Church, by virtue of our sacraments of initiation, have a role to play in discerning God's will and contributing to the Church's mission. We all have a part to play in the Church. Synodality affirms the importance of opening our hearts, minds, and ears to listen to diverse voices within the Church, valuing the diverse insights and experiences of all, and seeking consensus through a process of prayerful discernment. This discernment process involves intentional periods of silent reflection as we listen to Scripture, to one another, and to the Lord in prayer. Synodality serves to realize Pope Francis's vision of fostering a culture of encounter, accompaniment, dialogue, and co-responsibility within the Church. Synodality empowers the faithful to actively participate in the life and the mission of the Church as we discern together the signs of the time and respond with creativity and courage to the challenges and opportunities of our day. This is also what Vatican II called us to do in Gaudium et Spes. Furthermore, synodality reflects Pope Francis's deep pastoral concern for the unity and communion of the Church. Let's face it, fractures and division are present now even within the Church that we love. Pope Francis sees synodality as the methodology to overcome divisions and to build some bridges of understanding as we foster a sense of belonging and solidarity among all members of our Church. Solidarity then ultimately strengthens the Church for its mission of evangelization. As we overcome our internal divisions and develop a more united and engaged community of disciples, we become a church better able to proclaim the gospel of love and grace and better equipped to address the urgent challenges facing the human family today. We know and see all too clearly what some of those most pressing global challenges are. In social media and news headlines, we are seeing the significant poverty, inequality, climate change, immigration issues, and numerous other dreadful troubles that affect our ability to live good earthly lives together. We are given the gift of the enduring legacy of Gaudium et Spes and its impact on several key themes also found in Pope Francis's seminal encyclical decades later in Fratelli Tutti. Synodality is a vitally important method to bring about the Pope's vision for an inclusive, engaged, and participatory Church. This, in turn, strengthens the Church to accomplish its mission of proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ to all and addressing the urgent issues that we face in our world today. As you go forward in all that you do, I hope that you will take a few things with you. First, take with you a desire to read Gaudium et Spes and Fratelli Tutti. Allow these two church documents to form your vision of how the church can and should engage the modern world. 2, take with you a personal commitment to participate in the long, bumpy, and sometimes frustrating slow process of synodality by asking for the grace to be a true and honest listener to others and for others. 3, take with you a deep conviction that our Lord Jesus is calling you to share the gospel he entrusted to his church. Be strengthened by our Lord to take decisive action to address the global challenges that face humanity, remembering that you are never alone as followers of Christ. Imitate and share Christ's love and compassion in your witness and service each and every day of your lives. Thank you, and God bless you.
Sit down.
Okay.
I want to thank the Cardinal for an inspiring and cogent talk, bringing together these two wonderful documents. And I'll spend a few minutes. Hopefully, some of you have questions, reflections, comments.
Someone's got to be first. Someone's got to jump
Here
in
he
the pool.
is. There he is.
Synodality. S-Y-N-D-A-L-I-T-Y. Synodality, from the Greek words synodos, meaning to walk together. Okay?
Yes. Good. Don't be afraid. You asked a question last time, too. Do you mind standing up?
You're really doing me like this. Okay.
I know I asked a lot.
Okay. So, something that stood out to me is what you mentioned about silent reflection. And you said something along the lines of listening to others. I think there was another group. And then listening to the Lord in prayer. Now, I was thinking about how English is structured here. In prayer can apply to all of those groups, or it can just apply to the Lord. Is it possible to listen to others in prayer?
Personally, I think it implies both. Let me just give you a little description of how the Synod worked in terms of using prayer time. Each session of the Synod began with prayer. You know, we're Catholics. You got to start with prayer. But then, after each segment of the conversation, there were 3 or 4 minutes dedicated to silent prayer, so that you could hear in a reflective way what other people may have said. I think one of the things that we struggle with in our society now is that we don't know how to listen. We begin a conversation with the conclusion, and we don't give each other a chance to explain what they may be thinking or feeling, and sometimes the best way to do that is to stop talking yourself and open your ears and heart to hear what the Lord may be saying, sometimes through the people who are talking. I think that prayer in our Catholic tradition is more than simply saying words, it's opening your heart, your mind, to what may be God's voice, sometimes mediated through other people. I have a lovely chapel in my residence, and my young secretary, who is quite a character, that's why he's my secretary. I could not live with a boring person. Sometimes if I come out of the chapel in the morning, if I've said prayer, he said, "Did you talk to the Lord?" I said, "Yes, Kevin." "What'd he say?" That is, you've got to be willing to hear in prayer what the Lord may be saying to you. And the New Testament, the book of the Acts of the Apostles, has a number of examples of how the ancient church did that. They faced difficulties, and then they paused and they prayed. And sometimes in the book of the Acts of the Apostles, they say, the room shook. Well, I don't know if it was a earthquake, or it shook because of the enthusiasm that the people in that room had in their prayer and in the dialogue that took place. So I hope I didn't over-answer, but okay.
Yes, great.
Thank you, Eminence, for your talk. I think a lot about unity, because I work for the Knights of Columbus, and our unity is our second principle. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of just the fractious nature of politics, and that's crept into the church. But I think one thing is that we all, as Christians, we all have a responsibility to do our part for that unity. And sometimes that means turning off social media or realizing you're being manipulated by a lot of this. And so, we each have limits of responsibility. You can't, maybe the most important thing we can do is pray for unity, pray for our families. Those are the things we all can have an impact on. So, you have to kind of be careful not to get pulled into this.
And this is Supreme Knight Patrick Kelly. So he doesn't just work for the Knights of Columbus. He tries to lead them around, in their service, in their ministry. I think we sometimes confuse unity and uniformity. You can have a spirit of unity. You have it in your own homes. You have it among your own family members. That there's something that binds you together. That doesn't mean that you're always going to agree with each other. Unity has room for diversity of opinions. I've used this example before, but I think it's appropriate. Two of the great saints in our history, Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure, had theologically different opinions. But they're both saints. And I like to say, and they may still be going toe-to-toe in the heavenly kingdom, But there's room in the church for a variety of opinions, as long as they're grounded in respect and in love.
I'm coming. I've read and heard that for many bishops and cardinals, this was such a new process, maybe not for you, but a totally new process of proceeding towards the sense of a wholeness of discussion and future planning. So I'd like to ask you to help us, your own reflection on what it was for you to be in the synod in this process, and also what it might have been for your fellow cardinals and bishops and priests.
Well, I can speak for myself, but maybe I hope it reflects some of their experiences. This was my fourth synod. I had been a member of 3 previous synods, and this was completely a different environment. First of all, in the prior synods, which, there were benefits. I don't want to compare one to the other and say that this was the only right way to do it. But in the other synods, each bishop was expected to have an intervention on the theme, whatever that theme might be, of 3 or 4 minutes, whatever. And you just listened to one speech after another, after another, after another, after another. Whereas in this synod, we sat at tables, round tables, and I think there were 36 tables. They were divided by language groups, so the Spanish-speaking people were at several tables, and the French-speaking people and the English. But laity, clergy, and religious were shared at the same table. And it was delightful to hear people from different perspectives. We sometimes pigeonhole people. Oh, well, she's a woman religious, she's going to believe this. And he's a bishop, he's going to believe that. And this is a layman, and he's going to... We listened to each other, and we had, I think, a wonderful experience of friendship, Fratelli tutti, and an openness to hear what the other person had to offer. One of the first things that we did first of all, the Synod went on basically for 4 weeks, and you were assigned to a table basically for 4 or 5 days. So you got to know the people in your table group. But then you switched. So your conversation expanded by being involved with others. One of the first things we did at our table, and I think they did it at others, was to ask this question: how would you like to be called? How should we call you? And there were some wonderful, wonderful exchanges. We put aside the formal titles, and you became Marianne, I became Wilton. One of the best exchanges that happened with Archbishop Timothy Costello, who is the Archbishop of Perth, and he said, well, I'm Tim. Don't call me Timothy Patrick, because that was on his... He said, my parents only used that when I was in trouble. And we all could identify, if you were in trouble, your mom called you Elizabeth Ann, you got the message. So we began to speak with each other in a casual, personal way. The Holy Father was there. He couldn't be there for every moment because he had other things to do. But he would come into the Synod, he'd be wheeled into the Synod, and he'd just kind of poke around, and people could come up to him. And there's a picture of me with him, and I'm laughing, and people want to know, what did he say that made you laugh that way? But he was laughing too. I mean, so it was a casual encounter, and I think it was a grace-filled encounter.
Yeah, Michael.
You mentioned the preferential option for the poor.
Yes.
And this is the first Holy Father to come from Latin America, where in a way that didn't happen in the church in the U.S., the concern with the preferential option for the poor has dominated the discussion in the Latin American church. How much do you feel the American church has to learn from the experiences of our Salem, our Latin American brothers, and their reception of the council in regard specifically to Gaudium et Spes?
Well, I think one of the things that, and he has said this in so many words, he was profoundly influenced by Aparecida, that synodal gathering of bishops from Latin America. We need to, I think, look at what drives people to immigrate. It's the same dynamic that brought the Irish, the Italians, the Poles to this country. They were fleeing either poverty, famine, persecution. So they were in a position, as our most recent immigrant brothers and sisters, they're fleeing from hunger and joblessness, physical, political oppression. Rather than concentrate on stopping them at the border, I think we need to figure out, can we do something about alleviating the causes that caused them to flee from their own countries? If there were plentiful jobs, plentiful food, plentiful opportunities in some of the countries that the people are fleeing from, I don't think we would have, we would still have immigrants, but we wouldn't have, I don't think, this rush. The preferential option for the poor, I don't think means simply that we provide food. We examine the root causes of what drives people to flee their homes, their families. That's the preferential option dimension that I don't think we as Americans have fully appreciated. And it's the challenge, I don't know when we will come to an understanding, a better understanding, or an understanding in the first place, of how do our immigrant poor people today reflect the same dynamics, fears, hopes, and dreams of the immigrant communities of 100, 150 years ago. When I was a bishop of Belleville, Belleville was a wonderful southern Illinois community. And here I was, a city kid from Chicago, completely unprepared to be the bishop of a farming community. My mother, when I told her I had been signed to Belleville, she said, "You wouldn't know the front end of a cow from the back without a map, So I had to learn from them, and I learned one of the things, there was a large, many of the people in the Diocese of Belleville had immigrated from Germany during the Kulturkampf. Bismarck had chased them out, and they were under pressure, religious opposition, and they came to the United States, and they became very successful farmers and generous in that. Well, there was a sister who worked for the diocese who was a daughter of that community. And she went to a family gathering. I don't know what the cause of it was, anniversary and they were using, many of those farmers had to hire Mexican workers because they couldn't do the farming jobs because they didn't have the kids. Families that once had 8, 9 kids and they could do that, they weren't there anymore. So they were using these Spanish-speaking laborers to do the work that needed to be done. And she was listening to her cousins and relatives, and they were really, being cruel in their language to describe the workers that they were depending on. And she stopped one and she said, "You're saying exactly the same things that were said about great-grandpa. He didn't speak English, and they paused, and she was right. So we have to sensitize ourselves with an understanding of what does it mean to be, sensitive in caring for the poor. Right now in the Archdiocese of Washington, I'm going through a real eye-opening experience of the slavery that took place in Maryland by the Jesuits and by many of the religious communities that were slave owners. And so in some of my parishes, I've been going around, and I wasn't the first, to bless the graves of the enslaved, unmarked graves of the enslaved. And it brings back, how do we care for our history? How do we accept our history? I'm learning a lot. I got much more to do, though. Next.
Yes, hold on. I want, what, was there someone here? Okay, just.
You speak well in both the writings and in the call to really engage in the modern world. And for young people, a lot of times seeing the fracture, the polarization, instead is escapism into virtual worlds. What would be your advice to young people about how to really ground themselves in being people of faith called to respond to our needs with that creativity and courage? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say recognize, the limits of what social media can do. Let's face it, it's here to stay. Nobody's going to undo the social media platforms that are now so woven into our lives, but we also have to recognize their limitation. Was it, who was, I think, Newton Minow, who said that television was the vast wasteland? Somebody recognized that there were limits to what that vehicle can do. If our young people who use it, and I depend on young people to help me, they're dragging me into the 21st century, but to recognize that it can only tell you so much. It's not the end of truth, and it has its limits. So as long as they're aware of the limits of the world in which they live with social media, and then that's as much as anybody can do. I'm not a gamer. I've never used gaming as a vehicle of entertainment. It came along after I was, beyond that stage. But I worry about so many young people who use, they use the gaming platform, and sometimes the violence that they see, it infects them. It kind of says, that's how you solve a problem. You just blow it away. Well, those are the limits.
Yep, hold on.
Hi. A lot of the social teaching in the church, unlike some of the other teachings of dogma and doctrine in terms of social justice, it uses a lot of language from secular politics, and some of that language is very new, some of it's kind of faddish, words like globalization and a lot of the words that are used in social doctrine can be used apart from anything in the scriptures or anything in the gospel or anything in the historical tradition. And it could be used autonomously, free from any church influence, and it is. And many of those words originate from secular politics. And in a particular time and place, we're in the modern world, so we have to use the words of modernity. The church's teaching over history has changed insofar as that the medieval teaching about the secular order and what people should be doing, the church tends to accommodate over the ages. Nowadays, things change very rapidly, very quickly, technological progress. So my question is, what are the advantages and the disadvantages of the social justice teachings of the church, whether it's Fratelli Tutti or Gaudium et Spes, which tended to be more general? Some of the modern encyclicals, it seems like they'll make some specific policy recommendations and then they just kind of drop out of the picture and they're forgotten about and not mentioned again in later encyclicals. So my question is, what is the dangers, advantages, disadvantages of using the language of secularity and the modern political language? And if Jesus and the gospel and church teaching is to be Christian-based, where does that fit in?
You know, that's a marvelous question, and I'd like to refer to one of our medieval theologians to respond to it. Thomas Aquinas used Aristotle's language to explain Christian doctrine. In other words, he chose language that originated in another environment to help articulate the mystery of faith. Now, you're right, we have to be prudent in how we use language, because language does change, so rapidly. Thomas was dealing with the philosophical language of people that were long dead. And we're using language that can, change with the twinkling of an eye. So we have to be prudent in adapting language and acknowledge that what we say on Monday may be influenced by what happens on Thursday in a social media platform. So you can't put all of your eggs in contemporary language for fear that the nuances, the meanings, can shift so radically that what you thought was perfectly clear, because it was au courant, is going to shift. I think the social justice teachings of the church really has to use contemporary language, because it's speaking to the world in which this language is being employed. Let me delve into something that may get me into hot water. Some of the language that theologically we have used to describe the sexual revolution uses language that is appropriate, but it's not contextualized. So, disordered. It fits in an Aristotelian world. Things are ordered to their proper end, but disorder now, in our world, suggests that it's sick, somebody is disordered. We have to use language that people understand, but we can't, put all of the emphasis on language that is so subtly and sometimes drastically changed in its usage. Okay. Surely there must.
There's got to be one more. Daniel?
So Gaudium et Spes, as its title indicates, is a hopeful document. It's even been accused of being an optimistic document by people who sometimes have very different opinions on other things. But one thing I'd like you to speak to, particularly for young people, how would you speak from the language of Gaudium et Spes to people who have trouble being hopeful in today's world? Perhaps, I think you see this especially because of climate change, of people who have difficulty being hopeful because they see the challenges ahead for themselves or for society, and get caught up in them, understandably. How do you think the language of Gaudium et Spes and of Pope Francis can help speak to those people?
Especially young people.
I think you put your finger on a very serious issue facing the church. We as a church, at root, have to be a hopeful people. If there isn't hope in the church, I'm in the wrong business. That is hope that really sees the possibility of improvement, sees the possibility of renewal, sees the possibility of reform. I think young people in every era have been faced with that same challenge. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. The great social issues that were dominant in those days had to do with the civil rights movement. And there were young people who grew up in, very segregated environments who had the courage to say, things can be better. Some of the great heroes of the civil rights movement, obviously, many of the great African American leaders were buttressed by young white people who stood with them, who didn't give up the possibility of living in a better world, and who wanted a better world for themselves and for those who would follow them. So I think that's part of the grace of being young. Acknowledging the awful things that we are called to confront. There's something inside of young people, at least I've always experienced it, that says this is not the end. This is not how things should be. And the courageous young people say, I'm going to do something to improve it. Against great odds, the climate change, the situation right now in Gaza, in the Ukraine, in Sudan, those issues are so overwhelming, but without the hope that things can get better, we become part of the problem. Okay.
Cardinal, thank you so much for an enlightening, inspiring,
Oh, sure, I'll stay. I won't
if
run.
you, okay.
My train doesn't leave for a while.
Cardinal's not running, so if you want to stay and just chat for a minute or two, he'll be right here. I thought we were having a reception for you. I have to check on that.